I did have a question for you. It's perhaps to consider. You don't have, this is a rhetorical question. Don't answer. But you think about this. Well, why did it take Jesus to lay hands on him twice in order to bring about this healing? I mean, did Jesus misfire? Was he tired that day? We do know that when Jesus went to the town of Nazareth, that he could do few miracles there because of the people's lack of faith. So maybe there's a component of faith that's involved in the process by which God is delivering. And we know that a healing is actually a sign of a reversal of the fall. Because if there's no sin, that's when death and disease and all these other things come into place due to sin. So perhaps maybe in some ways we can get a perspective on what's happening here. But I think what would be really good would be if I had an interview of somebody. Bill, it's 1964. And you're sitting out. How old were you? No, don't even answer that. In 1964, you're sitting in a chair watching The Rifleman, Chuck Connors. All right, very boring shows compared to today's shows. But all of a sudden, the picture gets all snowy. Gets all snowy on the television screen. What do, Bill? You take the rabbit ears, VHF antenna. And you move the ears. You go, wuk, wuk. You straighten them out and do this. You sit down and it happens again. So you move it a little further. You adjust it exactly right. Sometimes you have to have somebody stand there holding the rabbit ears so you can have this reception. And if it gets really bad on the TV, you know what you do? You go up to the side of the television and you slap it. Because they're old fuses. But you have to work all these things to get it working exactly right. And you have to kind of tinker with it a little bit. That is how God works in our lives. It wasn't Jesus' fault. It's because that man needed 2 treatments for this to happen, to bring this about in his life. And we could consider that, we could weigh that against the idea of how the church works with deliverance ministries. When a person is let's say, and it's not that common, let's say somebody has a full-blown manifestation of demonization. It's not like you don't watch those TV shows, but it's not like what you hear about in the TV shows or the movies where the person comes and there's this big battle and the person is exorcised and they're set free for the rest of their life. Really what it is, it's a series of exorcisms. There's a number of prayer services. This is usually how it happens. There's a series of quote-unquote treatments. And this is what God is doing in our lives. A lot of times, this idea of deliverance, and of course, all these sorts of healings, the corrections, the things in our lives, is God preparing us for heaven. He's preparing us to go back in the garden, in a sense, if you will. Back to this state of union with God. And it takes a process, and a lot of it's involved us. We are involved in the way that we lead our lives, the decisions we make, how we turn to God at certain times. So the more little things that we do, the more we're receptive, the reception from old television, the more we are receptive to what God is doing in our lives, the more we're willing to place ourselves in the presence of Christ so He can lay His hands on us again and again and again, is a degree to which we will be made perfect and our eyes will be able to see. We will lose that blindness. All the clarity will come. The more close you get to God, the clearer your vision of the world, of your life, and your purpose. And the more you go close to God, the more you draw to Him, that's the greater you're going to understand what God is really saying. Wisdom and the understanding of God, knowing the will of God, discerning the will of God, has to come by a number of ways, of course, but really it comes by spending time with God so you recognize His voice when you hear Him. Back to, let's pick another old guy, Peggy. Let's say, all right, I hope you know, because of the sermon illustration, I'm going to be sleeping on the couch tonight. Okay, but let's say this, Peggy. If I said his master's voice, what would I be referring to? RCA Victor Records. And on the records, they would have a picture of this little dog sitting there, and there'd be an old stereo phono record player, with the ones with the big horns on them. And the dog's sitting there going like this, listening, because he's recognizing its master's voice through the record. The clarity of the record, the dog could understand and discern the voice of the master on the record. That's you and me. We're that little dog. And the more we listen, the clearer we are hearing, the better we'll hear and understand God in our lives. Please stand.